Okay, so for the first question, hello, my name is Vincent Campo. I am a third year student here at TMU and a first year history student after having done 2 years in professional communications. I am passionate about all things music and have been playing music since I was 5 years old. I have since been producing and composing music and have participated in many projects in the music industry. Um, the project I currently began pursuing was the creation of a Discord server. This server would be a community which connects upcoming artists with established industry players such as managers, producers, and A&Rs, or even label executives. But in February, we changed this vision to doing live shows because we realized that it would be too hard to try to market a Discord server directly to artists. We fear that there may be too much of a learning curve in understanding the benefits of the platform. Now we're putting together the concept of these shows. Our end users exist on two distinct levels, and understanding that distinction is actually one of the more clarifying moments of the semester. On the surface, the ultimate beneficiaries of what we're building are the audiences who will attend our shows. People in Toronto who are looking for a live music experience that feels energetic, intimate, and genuinely exciting rather than overly produced or like corporate. But the more immediate and critical end user, the one we needed to understand first before anything else can move forward, is of course the artists themselves. Without artists committing to perform, there are no shows, and without shows, there is no audience. So for most of the semester, artists were who we were really designing for and listening to. What we learned from them shaped the entire trajectory of the project. When we were still pursuing the Discord server concept, though, we started having conversations with artists about what they needed and how they navigated the industry. And what came back to us consistently was that the pain points were real, but the solution we were proposing didn't feel immediately accessible or really compelling to them. The value of a community platform isn't obvious until you're already inside it, so asking the artist to invest time in something new and unproven on top of everything else they're already managing was a bit of a harder sell than we anticipated. Those conversations are ultimately what led us to pivot towards live shows, because what artists actually responded to was the idea of a real performance opportunity that could get them in front of new audiences and the right industry ears. So once we shifted direction, we kept talking to artists and learned even more about what would make them want to be part of what we were building specifically. We learned that they care deeply about the environment of a show, the vibe, the crowd, the other artists on the show, because performing at the wrong kind of event can actually work against you in terms of how you're perceived. We learned that clear and respectful communication matters enormously to them because a lot of emerging artists have had experiences with disorganized or even exploitative opportunities and are now rightfully cautious. And we learned that the promise of a show that feels like a real event, high energy, well promoted, well produced, with a crowd that's actually there to have a good time, is far more motivating than vague promises of exposure. Every one of those insights directly shaped how we're designing the experience and how we communicate about it. There were honestly several setbacks this semester, but the ones that taught me the most were the team conflict we ran into and the difficulty we faced trying to find artists willing to commit to our shows. The team conflict was hard because when you're working on something creative and personal, disagreements can feel bigger than they are. We had different visions for what the shows would look like and feel like, and for a while those differences created some friction that slowed everything down. And for a time, we kind of just stopped working. The lesson there was about learning to separate the idea from the person presenting it. Just because someone pushes back on your vision doesn't mean they're against you. We had to get better at having honest, direct conversations without letting tension linger. And once we did, the project actually moved faster. The difficulty finding artists was a different kind of frustration. We assumed that because we were offering a platform and exposure, artists would be easier to jump in. What we didn't account for was the level of trust that needs to exist before an artist commits their time and reputation to something new. A lot of outreach went unanswered, and early on that felt a little bit discouraging, but it forced us to refine our pitch and think more seriously about what we were actually offering and why it should matter to them. The most surprising and fulfilling accomplishment was when that work paid off and we started getting genuine positive responses from artists based on our different ideas of shows we wanted to put on. And that first real sort of I'm in response felt like validation, not just for the project, but for just all of our ideas in general. The journey was one of the more intense creative experiences I've had in an academic setting because mostly because it never really felt like school. It actually felt like trying to build something real with real consequences if things fell apart for other people. There were stretches of genuine momentum where everything I felt like it was clicking, and there were stretches where the team was stuck. Communication had broken down, our outreach was going nowhere, and the emotional range of the semester was wider than, I'd say definitely wider than most. What made it manageable was the support structure around us. The course environment was collaborative, I'd say, for sure. Peers weren't just sitting in feedback sessions waiting to check a box. They were really engaged and offering perspectives that actually shifted how I thought about my project. There was something valuable about getting feedback from people who are going through the same uncertainty that I am, because they're not just evaluating me from the outside. They actually understand the pressure, and it's also that they're doing a different project, and they're not necessarily seeing it from an industry perspective, because they themselves are not in the music industry. So I get like an outside point of view. The group sessions were a consistent resource, particularly during the pivot period when we needed someone to help us think through whether the new direction was actually stronger or just different. And the instructor pushed us in a way that felt encouraging rather than critical. There was always an underlying message that the struggle was part of it and that we were capable of figuring it out. That kind of support is easy to underestimate until you reflect on how much it kept you going during those harder weeks. The skill I grew the most in was, I'd say, stakeholder communication, and more specifically learning how to pitch something to someone who has no existing reason to care about it. Before this project, most of my communication in the music space was either creative, collaborating on tracks, discussing ideas with other musicians, or entirely informal. This was the first time I had to consistently put together outreach to people I didn't know and make a compelling case for why they should actually give me some time and trust. That process was pretty humbling at first and genuinely skill building over time. Connected to that was the skill of conflict resolution with the team. Working through disagreements with teammates on something this personal required a level of emotional maturity and directness that I hadn't really been tested on before. I got better at naming the vision. The impact of both skills was concrete. Better team communication meant fewer delays and more aligned decisions, and stronger pitching meant we actually started converting outreach into a real artist interest. Beyond the project itself, but though, these are skills I know I'll carry into my professional setting, especially in an industry where, like music, where relationships and communication are essentially the entire game. I learned that I'm more resilient than I typically give myself credit for, but also that I have a real tendency to get attached to ideas in ways that can slow me down. When we made the decision to move away from the Discord server, it was, I think, logically the right call. We knew it was, but it still caused many more delays. I'd already started building an identity around that concept in my head. Imagining where I could go and letting go of that felt like a loss, even when it was really a step forward. Recognizing that pattern in myself was useful because it showed me I need to be more intentional about staying outcome focused rather than idea focused. I also learned that I'm genuinely energized by the work that sits at the intersection of community and music. I've always known I love music, but this project really helped me understand that, and I'm really drawn to the ecosystem around it, like the relationships, the infrastructure, the spaces where artists and opportunity meet. That's a more specific and useful thing to know about yourself than just I like music. I also discovered I'm someone who needs to believe in what I'm building to sustain effort over a long period. When the Discord concept started feeling shaky, my motivation dipped noticeably. When we pivoted to the live shows and I could actually picture it happening, everything picked back up. Sort of that connection between label and output is something that I'll pay attention to going forward. This project gave me a clear sense of direction that I had coming into the semester. I've been involved in music my whole life, performing, producing, composing, but I hadn't figured out exactly what role I wanted to play in the industry at a larger scale. This experience pointed me towards something more entrepreneurial and infrastructural. There's a real gap between emerging artists and the industry connections they need to grow, And I now want to be someone who actively works uh, to close the gap rather than just observing it from the inside as a musician. On the personal side, the team conflict we've navigated this semester pushed me to develop as a collaborator in ways that I hadn't needed to before. A lot of my music work has been relatively independent, producing on my own, working, or at the most, sort of working just with one other person. So being in a team with sort of shared ownership of the vision was really new territory for me. Uh, Being able to navigate that and have the project still sort of remain intact as today, and keeping those relationships intact too, felt like pretty good growth. Professionally, the project also gave me something concrete to talk about. In an industry where everyone is trying to break in, having a real initiative that I can speak to, the vision and the lessons learned is more valuable than a resume. It's a story, and stories are what move people in music, I believe. The most immediate priority is locking in a venue right now. We have a clear vision for what these shows should feel like, starting as intimate showcases and building towards larger, high-energy ticketed events that feel more like parties than traditional concerts. But none of that moves forward without a physical space where we can work with and trust. We're looking for somewhere that fits the vibe we're going for, which is energetic, accessible, and feels a little underground even as it grows. We're thinking about venues like maybe like the Baby G, which is on like Ossington and Yonge, I think. Alongside that, though, we need to finalize our first artist lineup and build out a professional strategy that actually reaches the audience we're targeting. One of the things we've been thinking about is what makes our shows distinct from the dozens of other independent showcases happening in Toronto right now. And the answer to that is we keep coming back. The answer we keep coming back to is energy and pace. We want these events to feel curated but alive. Not like a polished industry showcase, where everything is stiff and formal. Getting that feeling across is how we market the shows is going to be a real creative challenge. Longer term, the vision is to run a series of events that build a genuine community around them and eventually use the audience as the foundation for something larger. The Discord server idea isn't dead. It's just kind of waiting for us to have the credibility and community to make it land the way that we originally intended. The single best thing I would change is going directly to end users much earlier in the process. We spent the first several weeks developing the Discord server concept largely among ourselves, refining it internally before really pressure testing it with the people that it was actually built for. By the time we already started having real conversations with artists and realized the concept wasn't landing the way we expected, we were already weeks in. And that's a costly way to learn a lesson that earlier outreach would have surfaced in the first few weeks. I would also approach the team dynamic more proactively from the start. The conflict we experienced wasn't catastrophic, but it did cost us time and energy at moments when the project needed momentum. If I were doing this again, I'd push for clearer role definitions and a more explicit conversation about how we handle disagreements before they come up, rather than figuring out under pressure mid-semester. More broadly, I would try to hold my initial idea loosely from the beginning. Coming in with passion is important, but coming in with too much attachment to a specific execution can blind you to better directions. The pivot we made was ultimately the right call, but it would have been a bit more valuable if it had happened earlier and felt like a deliberate choice rather than a forced one. Well, I mean, it was deliberate, but we didn't have all the options on the table. The most important takeaway is that iteration is not failure. It's actually the mechanism through which good ideas get built. Before this course, I think I subconsciously believed that pivoting meant you had gotten something wrong. Now I understand that the pivot was the work. Testing an idea, discovering its limits, and adjusting based on real feedback isn't detour from the progress. It is progress. That reframe has already changed how I approach creative projects outside of this course. The distinct value this course offered is something that's hard to replicate in traditional academic environment, structured accountability around a real initiative. Most courses ask you to analyze or respond to existing ideas. This one asks us to build something and then defend it, adjust it, and keep going regardless of how messy it got. I would absolutely recommend this course, but with a clear sense of if it's right for you. I recommend this course specifically to somebody who has an idea they've been setting up but haven't been able to push themselves to actually pursue. The course provides sort of the structure and accountability that most people need to get out of their own heads and to really acting on their ideas. So if you've kind of been saying, I want to build something, but you keep waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect plan, I'd say this course either is the perfect moment or is what makes you realize that there is no perfect moment and you just need to start. And I would recommend it to anybody in a creative field, of course, who wants to understand the entrepreneurial side of their industry. So yeah, thank you.